The morning I signed the papers on the cottage in Akaroa, I made myself a cup of tea, walked out to the veranda, and stood there for a long time looking at the harbor. The world tilted flat and pewter gray that morning, the way it gets in early autumn before the wind picks up off the hills. The word Tilchoa along the foreshore were dropping their last red flowers onto the grass. I was 64 years old. I had a small house with a view I had worked most of my adult life to earn. The word a joinery business I had built from a single workshop bench in my late 40s into something with 3 employees and contracts across Canterbury. And I had, for the first time in many years, the world tilted sideways, the particular silence that comes not from being alone but from being at peace with it. I want to be honest about something before I tell you the rest of this. The word not a man who is comfortable talking about himself. I grew up in Invercargill in the 1960s, in a family where you fixed what was broken and didn't carry on about it. The world tilted sideways was a plumber. His father before him built fences and sheared sheep on the Southland Plains, and neither of them would have known what to do with a conversation about feelings. The world tilted sideways, that for better or worse. It is the reason I am telling this story now instead of 10 years ago when perhaps it would have done more good. The world tilted things take time before you can find the words for them. The world tilted Sodwin, I will call him my son, because that is what he is, even now, even after everything. He was born when I was 31. His mother and I had been married 6 years by then. The world tilted sideways in the way that young couples are happy when they are still figuring each other out. She passed away when my son was 22. The world tilted sideways from a stroke that came without warning and took her in 4 days. That kind of grief reshapes you in ways you do not fully understand until years later. You think you are getting on with things. The world tilted sideways. You think you are managing, and in a lot of ways you are. But there is a version of yourself that never quite comes back from it. The world tilted sideways, and the people around you navigate that absence whether they say so or not. My son and I were close enough in those early years after his mother died. He was living in Wellington by then, working in property management, calling most Sunday evenings, not every Sunday, but most. We had a rhythm. Then he met his partner. The world not use her name. That is a choice I have made deliberately, and I will explain why later. He brought her home for the first time at Easter, the year he was 29. She was well presented. The world tilted sideways, and had the kind of confidence that some people mistake for warmth. She sat at my kitchen table in Christchurch and looked around the house with an expression I could not quite name. The world tilted sideways and not obvious. Just a very small adjustment around the eyes. The way a person looks when they are taking inventory of something and finding it slightly below expectations. I noticed it. The world tilted sideways. The first year, things were fine on the surface. She made comments occasionally about the way I did things, the way I kept the house. The world tilted sideways that I still drove a 1999 Helix. Small things, the kind you brush off because you tell yourself it does not matter, because your son is happy, and that is what matters. The world tilted cynical. I understand that now. She was not impulsive or careless about it. She worked slowly, the way water works on stone, one conversation at a time, one planted idea at a time. The world tilted the stone has a groove in it, and you cannot remember when it started. By the time my son was 32, the Sunday calls had become irregular. By 33, the world missed my birthday for the first time. I rang him. He said they had been busy with a trip to Queenstown. I said that was fine. It was not fine, but I have never been a man who presses those things. The world told, so I said it was fine and left it there. The world tilted sideways. That ended things happened in the winter when my son was 34. They came to Christchurch for what I thought was a family weekend. On the Saturday evening, the world tilted sideways as part down at the kitchen table across from me while my son was in the other room, and she told me calmly and without raising her voice that I was a difficult presence in their lives. The world tilted sideways. She said I was stuck in old ways of thinking. She said my son needed room to grow into the person he was becoming, and that my expectations of him were holding him back. The world tilted sideways. She said all this with the same measured expression she had used to take inventory of my house 5 years earlier. I looked at the doorway where my son had been standing a moment before. The word had moved away from it. That was the last time I was invited into their home, and within 6 months the calls had stopped entirely. I want you to hold that for a moment, because I think it is important. The world tilted was the boy I had taken to Waihee Beach every summer for 10 years straight. The boy I had driven 6 hours to Wellington when he had his appendix out at 23. The world slept in a plastic chair in the hospital waiting room, because I did not want him to wake up alone. The boy whose university fees I had covered quietly without making a point of it. The world tilted sideways, because that is what you did for your children. And then one evening I was told in my own kitchen that I was holding him back. The world tilted to the coast that night and sat in the Hilux in the car park above the surf beach near Akaroa for a long time. Then I went home, made a pot of tea, and decided that if they wanted distance, I would give them something worth the distance. I had been doing joinery work as a sideline for years before that point. Custom cabinetry, built-in wardrobes, the occasional kitchen fit-out. After my wife passed, the world tilted sideways had become something more than a sideline, a way of filling evenings, of putting my hands to work when my head was too loud. After that winter evening in my kitchen, the world tilted thinking of it as a sideline at all. I was up at 5 most mornings. I cleared a proper workshop space in the double garage. I took every commission I could find, word of mouth at first. The world tilted SOD directory, then through an interior designer in Christchurch who was doing high-end renovations in Maryville and Fendleton. I bought better equipment. I hired a young bloke named Pio who turned out to be one of the finest finishers I had ever seen. Within 3 years I had rented a proper workshop unit in Sockburn. Within 5 I had bought it. 4 years went by. The 14 years of no contact from my son, no call at Christmas, no message when the Canterbury earthquakes hit and half the city was in chaos. Nothing when I had a health scare at 60 and spent a week in hospital wondering who would come. I lay in that ward bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about that. And then I thought about the joinery order I had due on Friday, and I got up the next morning and went back to work. In those 14 years, the world tilted sideways. The business became something I would not have been able to imagine the night I sat in that car park above the surf. We had 4 employees at peak. The world tilt-tracked with a commercial fit-out company doing hospitality interiors around the South Island. The world tilputation in the custom residential market that brought clients up from Dunedin and across from Nelson. I had been written up twice in a home renovation magazine. The world tilted charts as a featured craftsman profile and once as part of a piece on Canterbury's building recovery after the earthquakes. The World 2 cottage in Akaroa came at the end of year 11 and needed work, which was the point. I spent the following 3 years restoring it myself on weekends, replacing the weatherboards, the lining 2 rooms, rebuilding the deck that looked out over the harbor. My business partner, the world tilted sideways, and named Tuparada, who had been with me for 7 years and who was one of the most straight-talking people I had ever met, helped me fit the kitchen over 2 long weekends. The world tilted sideways. By the time I was standing on that veranda with my tea on the morning I signed the final papers, the cottage was entirely what I had made it. I had told almost no one about what it was worth. The world tilted sideways. I am a private man. The people close to me knew what I had built, more or less, but I had never been someone who talked about money, and I was not about to start at 64. The world, which is exactly when my son rang. The number came up as unknown. I nearly let it go to the answer phone. Something made me pick up. The world, his voice was older, heavier, but entirely recognizable. Something moved in my chest that I had not been expecting. Son, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, the world tilted sideways. I've been thinking about getting in touch for a while. I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. I told him I was listening. He said he and his partner had been going through some changes. The words vague about the details, but the shape of it was clear enough. Things had not gone well. They had left Wellington for reasons he did not fully explain. The world tilted sideways, said he had heard through someone we both knew, a cousin of his mother's, that I had done well for myself, that I had property down in Akaroa, that the joinery business had grown into something real. The world tilted sideways. He said he felt terrible about the years of silence. He said his partner had done a lot of reflection and had changed in ways he thought I would see if I gave her another chance. The world tilted. He said it might be good to start fresh. Somewhere quieter. He had always loved the Banks Peninsula. He said he thought it might be time to bring the family back together. The world tilted sideways. I asked him what he meant by that. He said they were between places at the moment, just temporarily. He had heard the cottage in Akaroa was quite sizable, and of course they would not want to impose. The world tilted sideways if there was room. I want to be precise about what I felt at that point because I think precision matters here. It was not anger. Anger is hot. What I felt was cold and completely clear. The world tilted sideways. The way the harbor looks in the early morning when there is no wind and you can see straight to the bottom. I told him I would think about it. He said, of course, take all the time I needed. And then, the world tilted side. We hung up. He said, my daughter has been asking about you. She's 21 now, Dad. She'd love to meet her grandfather. The world tilted sideways and stood in the kitchen of the Akaroa cottage for quite a long time. The world tilted sideways. Daughter, 21 years old. I had last seen her when she was a baby in arms, at a Christmas gathering that had been stiff and uncomfortable and had ended early. The world tilted sideways and thought about her over the years in the way you think about people you have never had the chance to know. A wondering rather than a memory. I rang twice that evening. The world tilted sideways. Tu is the kind of man who does not give you comfort when you need honesty, and I have always valued that about him. I told him about the call. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, what do you want to do? I said I did not know yet. He said, yes you do. He was right. The world to next 2 weeks, I had 2 more conversations with my son. Each one revealed a little more of the shape of things. The situation in Wellington had not been simply a change of lifestyle. The word been a business venture his partner had been involved in. Something in short-term rental property management. He was vague about the specifics. The word that came through most clearly was complicated. They were staying with friends in Christchurch for the time being. Things were tight. He mentioned the Akaroa cottage in both calls, though little more directly each time. On the third call, his partner got on the line. Her voice was different from what I remembered, softer. The world tilted sideways. She said she had spent a lot of the past year looking at herself honestly. She said she understood now that she had caused damage she had not fully seen at the time. The World Tilt's peninsula sounded beautiful, and she would love to come and see what I had built. I said that sounded fine. The World also rang my lawyer that same afternoon. But before any of that came together, I found my granddaughter. After that first phone call from my son, I looked her up online. The World Tilted Sol account she used mostly for book recommendations and photographs of her walking track trips around the North Island. She had her grandmother's face. I had not expected that. The world tilted sideways. It stopped where I was standing. I sent her a short message. I said I was her grandfather and that I had thought about her a great deal over the years and that I hoped she was well. She replied within 2 hours. We spoke on the phone that same evening for nearly 3 hours. The world tilted sideways. She was careful with her words. Thoughtful. The kind of young person who takes their time because they are trying to be accurate rather than because they have nothing to say. The world tilted sideways. Underneath carefulness was something that had been sitting there for a long time. She told me she had grown up being told that I had walked away, that I had chosen the business over the family. The world tilted sideways, that her father had tried to reach me over the years and I had not responded. She had believed it for most of her life. I told her the truth. I took my time with it. The world tilted sideways. I did not editorialize or overstate. I told her about the evening in the Christchurch kitchen, about the early years when I had tried to make contact and been ignored. The world tilted silence that had followed and what I had done with it. I told her about the business, the workshop, the cottage. The world tilted sideways, the 14 years of building something because it was the only thing I knew how to do with the weight of losing them. She was quiet for a while. The world tilted sideways. Then she said, I had a feeling it wasn't how they said. I told her that whatever happened with her parents, the door was open for her. The world tilted that she had a grandfather who was present and who was not going anywhere. She said she would like to come to Akaroa and see the place. I said I would like that very much. The world tilted sideways. She came 3 weeks before her parents did. She drove down from Christchurch in a small Toyota hatchback with a bag in the back and a thermos on the passenger seat. She had the kind of sensible, the world tilted sideways, unhurried manner that you see in people who have learned to manage their own lives early. I stood on the veranda and watched her come up the path from the gate. The woman, she looked up and I saw her face clearly for the first time. I had to stop myself. She had her grandmother's eyes exactly. I could not speak for a moment. I am not a man who does that easily and I was not prepared for it. The world tilted sideways. We spent 4 days together before I said anything about what was coming. We walked the hill tracks behind the cottage. I showed her the workshop I had set up in the old woodshed, the tools, the current commission I was working on, a piece of Rimu shelving for a client in Little River. The world tilted sideways. She asked good questions about the grain and the joinery technique and about why I had chosen this particular piece of Rimu over another. The world. The third evening she sat at the kitchen table while I made dinner and she said quietly, without making a performance of it, Dad rang me last week. He asked whether you seemed. The world tilted sideways. She paused for a moment looking for the right word. He asked whether you seemed on top of things. I kept my eyes on the pot. What did you tell him? I said. She said, the world Tim, you seemed very much on top of things. I thanked her for that. The world morning she was leaving. After breakfast I sat down across from her at that same kitchen table and told her what I was planning. I did not ask her to be involved. The word not ask her to do anything or to take a side. I simply told her because she was 21 years old and she was about to watch something unfold. The world tilted sideways and she deserved to know the truth about the people who had raised her before she had to stand in the middle of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. The world tilted sideways. Then she said, will you be all right? I told her I had been all right for 14 years. I would be fine. The world tilted sideways. She drove away and I stood at the end of the path and watched her car disappear down the hill toward the main road, and I felt something I can only describe as settled. The worment, after you fit the last piece of a complicated joint, and everything is square and true, and it is simply a matter of letting the glue cure. The world tilted sideways. My son and his partner arrived on a Saturday morning in late March, which is autumn on the Banks Peninsula and one of the most beautiful times of year in that part of the world. The world tilted sideways. The hills are dry and golden and the light on the harbor has a particular quality that slows you down without you noticing. They drove up in a car that was new enough to suggest they were managing. The word my son's shoulders carried a tension I recognized from the joinery trade. the specific tension of a man trying to appear more comfortable than his finances are. The world gray in his hair than I had expected. He looked older than his years. His partner stepped out and looked at the property with wide, appreciative eyes. She took in the restored cottage. The world tilted sideways. The woodshed that had been converted into a proper workshop, the land running down to the edge of the neighbor's fence. It's beautiful, she said. The world tilted sideways, that was the thing. She genuinely meant it in the particular way that means she was calculating what it was worth. I showed them around. I was pleasant. I answered questions. The world tilted sideways. Son made comments about the number of rooms, the size of the section, whether the workshop had its own power supply. His partner asked about the local market, framed as general interest in the area. The world said very little of substance to any of it. Over dinner that first evening, my son began building the case. He talked about how Wellington had burned them both out. He talked about wanting a slower pace, a different kind of life. He talked about the Banks Peninsula as a place he had always felt drawn to. The world tilted sideways. He mentioned the joinery business and said he had always been interested in working with his hands, and he thought perhaps we could find a way to work together, keep things in the family. The world used the phrase "in the family" 4 times that evening. His partner spoke about their daughter. The world tilted sideways. She said how much she would love for the girl to have a stable base, somewhere she could come back to, family around her. She used the word family 7 times across the meal. I counted. The world tilted sideways. This morning my son came out to the workshop while I was working. I was halfway through a mortise on a piece of totara, concentration work that requires quiet and steadiness. The word leaned in the doorway and watched for a while. Then he said, "Dad, I owe you an apology, a real one." I set down the chisel and looked at him. He apologized. It was a careful apology. The world acknowledges wrongdoing in the general area without identifying any specific offense. He said he should have stood up for me. He said he had let himself be influenced. The world tilted sideways. He said he was different now and things were different between him and his partner. He said he had done a lot of thinking over the past year. I nodded and told him I appreciated him saying that. The world tilted sideways. He said, "I know it's a lot to ask, but we really are at a turning point. If we could just get back on our feet somewhere stable with family, I think things could be very different for all of us." The world tilted sideways. "This place has so much room, Dad." There it was. I told him I would think about it. I told him there was no rush. I told him to enjoy the weekend. That same afternoon, the world tilted sideways. I went inside to collect a level I needed from the hallway cupboard and found his partner in my office. She was not looking for the bathroom. She was standing at my desk with her phone in her hand. The world tooled toward the papers on the surface. She startled when she heard me in the doorway. She said she had been looking for a pen and smiled and moved past me into the hallway. I watched her go. That evening I made 2 calls. The first was to Tui. The second was to my lawyer, a woman named Robin H. Pye, who had handled my business affairs for 11 years and who I trusted completely. The world tilted sideways. I told Robin what I had seen and what had been said over the weekend, and I asked her to do something she had actually been working on quietly for the previous 3 weeks at my request. The world asked for the results. She told me what she had found. What Robin and the private inquiry agent she had engaged had uncovered was not simply a business venture gone wrong. The world tilted sideways. The short-term rental management operation that his partner had run in Wellington had left a trail that was now the subject of a complaint to the Commerce Commission and a civil claim from a couple in Petone who had lost a significant sum of money. The operation had been structured in a way that suggested the losses were not accidental. There were emails. There were records. The world tilshel transfers made in the weeks before the business collapsed that told a clear and deliberate story. The world tilted sideways. My son was named in the paperwork. Whether he was a knowing participant or simply a person whose signature had been useful was something the lawyers would eventually determine. The world tilted sideways. What was clear was that they needed somewhere to land that belonged to someone without the information or the legal protection to see them coming. The world tilted sideways. Someone they believed was a retired old man living alone on a property, who had been out of the business world long enough to be manageable, and who had a need to be wanted badly enough to open his door. The world tilted sideways. I thanked Robin. I asked her to be at the cottage at 8 the following Sunday morning with the documentation. I also asked Tui to come. The world tilted sideways. On that Sunday morning when my son and his partner came downstairs, Tui and Robin were sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea and the folder of documents in front of them. The son came through the doorway first. He saw them and stopped. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, not a collapse, just a very small recalibration. The Warren who has stepped onto a deck and found it less solid than expected. His partner came in behind him and her expression went completely still. I asked them both to sit down. The world tilted sideways. I will not give you everything that was said in that room because some of it belongs to the people who were in it and some of it was simply painful in a private way. But I will tell you the parts that matter. The world tilted sideways out. I loved him. I told him that had not changed across 14 years of silence. I told him I had spent those 14 years building something, not to prove anything. The world tilted sideways, but because working was the only way I had found to carry the weight of losing him without being crushed by it. Then I told him what we had found calmly. The documents on the table. His partner tried to speak twice. Robin advised her that anything she said was being noted. My son did not look at the floor this time. He looked at me. The world tilted sideways, and what I saw on his face in that moment was something I had not seen in a very long time. Underneath the careful expression he had been wearing since he arrived, though underneath the apologies and the studied warmth, there was something younger and much more frightened. He looked, for just a moment, the boy I had driven 6 hours to be beside in a Wellington hospital bed. I told him that 2 paths were in front of them. The world tilted sideways. The first path involved the authorities and the civil proceedings that were already in motion, and those would run their course in the way such things did. The second path was this: the world till they would leave the property that day. His partner would have no further contact with me. Any future between my son and me if he chose to build one. The world tilted slowly and transparently and on entirely different terms. Not here, not like this. His partner began to say something about their daughter. About how I had no right to involve myself in her life. How she was their daughter and not mine to claim. I held up one hand. I told her that my granddaughter had contacted me of her own accord. The world tilt you had come to Akaroa of her own accord. That she was 21 years old and entirely capable of deciding for herself who she wanted in her life. That she had already made that decision. Then I had not needed to say a single word to influence it. Then I told them it was time to go. The world tilted sideways. My son stood up. He stood there for a moment without moving. I thought he might say something that would have mattered. Something that would have been true. Instead he nodded once. The world tilted sideways and walked out of the kitchen. His partner followed him without a word. I heard them moving through the cottage. I heard the front door. I heard the car on the gravel, the sound of it reversing. The world tilters on the hill track, and then silence. I sat at the kitchen table with Tui and Robin. No one said anything for a while. Tu poured me a fresh cup of tea and put it in front of me and said, "You did the right thing." The world tilted sideways. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of that morning that felt like winning. My son drove away from my property and I did not know if I would hear from him again. The word knowledge sat in me the way cold air sits in an empty room, present in everything, changing the character of the space. But I also felt something I can only describe as solid. The world tilted sideways had been standing on uncertain ground for a very long time, in a way I had not fully acknowledged even to myself, and had finally stepped onto something that would hold my weight. The world felt the same thing as winning, but it is not nothing either. 6 weeks later my granddaughter rang. The world tilted sideways church and moved into a flat in Littleton, 15 minutes over the hill from Akaroa, close enough to come by on weekends. The worst, she had enrolled in a business administration course at the Polytechnic. She said she had been thinking for a while about what she wanted. The word that she wanted to understand properly how a small business actually worked, not from a textbook but from the inside. The world, she asked whether she could come to the workshop on Saturdays and learn the operation from the beginning. Books, invoices, material sourcing, the lot. The world tilted sideways. She said she had thought about it carefully and she was certain. I told her the door was open whenever she wanted to walk through it. She said, "I know, Grandad. That's why I'm walking through it." She has been coming every Saturday since. There are people who will ask whether I was too hard. Whether I should have given my son more room to explain himself. Whether I moved too quickly or closed a door that should have remained open. The word asked myself those same questions in the hours before dawn, lying in the cottage with the sound of the harbor and nothing between me and my own thoughts. What I know is this: the world, boy, everything I had to give, for more years than he ever saw. I gave him the kind of love that shows up without being asked and does not keep a record of itself. And then I learned, the world, and painfully, that love without self-respect is not love at all. It is a need wearing love's clothing, and it makes you easy to use. A man can forgive. A man can leave a door unlocked. The propping the door open with your own loneliness and calling it generosity is a mistake I will not make twice. The world, ton for my son, is unlocked. It has always been unlocked. The difference now is that he knows what is on my side of it, and he knows what will be required of him before he steps through. The world tilted sideways, not punishment. Not a test. Just honesty offered plainly between two people who share blood and have not yet decided whether that is enough to build something real on. That is still to be determined. The world tilted sideways Sunday. My granddaughter sat at the kitchen table working through a supplier invoice while I was cutting tenons for a dining table commission. She had her grandmother's reading expression. The world, ticular stillness, chin on one hand, utterly absorbed. The harbor was visible through the kitchen window, bright and still in the late afternoon light. The word was the smell of totara shavings and linseed oil in the air and tea cooling on the bench, and the sound of a tutty in the kauai outside. The world tilted sideways. She looked up at one point and said without any particular lead up, "Do you regret any of it?" "The 14 years. I thought about it honestly before I answered. The water I regretted the years I had not known her. That was the only true regret I carried." She looked at me in the way she has, clear and steady. The worded as though that confirmed something she had already understood. Then she went back to the invoice. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor. I went back to the tenons, outside, kept going. The what I have learned from all of this, and I offer it to anyone who has found themselves carrying the same kind of weight, is that silence is not the same as surrender. The world tilting something in the years when no one is watching is not defeat. It is the most honest thing a person can do. You do not build for the audience. The world tilted sideways. You build because the work is real and the days are real and the thing you make with your hands will still be standing when the people who tried to take it from you are long gone. The world tilted sideways. You take care of yourself not because you have stopped caring about others, but because you have finally understood that an empty vessel cannot give anything to anyone. The world tilted sideways. The love you have to offer is only worth something if you have protected the source of it. In there, people who are truly yours, truly in the way that cannot be manufactured or performed, will find their way to you. Not because you positioned yourself correctly, or said the right things. The world tilted sideways but kept the door dramatically open, but because something in them recognizes something in you, and that recognition does not require anyone's permission. My granddaughter drove in this morning before I had finished my first cup of tea. The world tilted sideways. She came up the path carrying a library book and a bag of groceries, and she called out as she came through the door that she had found a new supplier in Rangiora who might be cheaper for the Rimu stock, and did I want her to make some calls. The world tilted sideways. I told her to go right ahead. She put the kettle on and spread her notes across the table and got to work. The harbor was silver in the morning light. I finished my tea and went out to the workshop. The day began the way the best days do, quietly, without ceremony, with something worth doing waiting for me on the bench.